Hello, welcome to the webinar Beyond Zoom and learning how to effectively and safely collaborate on your most sensitive data. I'm Jamie Fitzgibbon, founder of Renaissance Insights, an advisory network of women around responsible AI, as well as a program manager at the Defense Innovation Unit. And I would like to welcome our panelists. We'll start with Will Ackerley, who is the CTO and co-founder of Virtue. He was formerly cloud security architect for a small government organization called NSA, and is the inventor of trusted data format. He is also the reigning expert, or at least in my opinion, of cryptology, big data, and all things data analytics. And then we also have Christopher Schroeder. He is CEO and co-founder of Gray Market Labs. He is also the founder of a nonprofit called Uncorked. Look it up. Does good things. And he was previously an officer in charge at Booz Allen Hamilton and was formerly an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University. So, Chris, could you tell us a little bit about Gray Market Labs and the connection with Virtue?
Absolutely. And Jamie, thank you very much for moderating today. Will, thank you for joining. I'm looking forward to the discussion. So Gray Market Labs, a little bit on our background. So Jamie said the world where both Will and I came from, supporting primarily the U.S. government, the intelligence community, but also other agencies, also of Fortune 500 customers. A lot of my background has been how do I deliver technology to solve problems for customers. And some of that was around cyber counterintelligence. So how do we protect individuals going online and doing research, collecting information, bringing it back, trying to get information knowledge out of all this proliferation of data out in the world. And as we were doing that for our customers, they also asked us, well, tell us the risks that are out there, and use commercial tools to go do this and help protect our users. And we did that, and we told them the risks that were there with those commercial tools, and those risks were tremendous. We saw those risks over time turn into issues, and really ruin years worth of our work and our customers' work within hours. And when you see that happen, my partner and I at least stepped back and said, you know what? We can do this better. I mean, we build product already. We're programmers, we're developers. Let's do this. Let's build that better way for people to engage and work online. And as we looked around at our customer bases and the potential customers, we said, well, this is well beyond the government. This is if you're a law firm and you need to protect your mergers and acquisitions. Right now, if you're doing pharmaceutical research, you need to protect that. And all these things that are going on in the world, every organization that has a plug into the internet has to have this type of protection. And so that's why we founded Gray Market Labs, as a public benefit corporation to address that problem of protecting, and with a social mission to protect life online and everything that goes with that. And as we're out there and we're doing our work, we came across and were introduced to a company called Virtue. And immediately from the first time that we met, there was a commonality of mission. Outside of our backgrounds, what we wanted to do in the world was establish trust. How can you do that? And what we both agreed is that you can't do that with the way current technology is and the way we approach technology, the way we approach online engagement. And that's why this is a good partnership for us, and hopefully a good partnership for Virtue, is that we have so much a collaborative opportunity. We complement each other so well in the way we approach the world, and where our technology solves problems, where we focus more on the activity side of things. They focus a lot on the content side of things. Bring that together, and you've got a really, really powerful solution.
Exactly. You're muted, Avery. Or Jamie.
We will hear more about those solutions as we move through the conversation here. But I think, obviously the title is Beyond Zoom. So if we stick this with Zoom, we've had 2,900% increase over a matter of months once COVID launched and everybody was struggling and searching desperately to find a collaboration platform. And that's just one of many platforms. So obviously online engagement and collaboration just skyrocketed. Yet we all are still trying to find that right, secure collaboration platform. So Will, what are you seeing in the market space?
Great question. Good tee up. I think, two big fundamental dimensions is what used to be, these are obvious, right? But what used to be a lot of in-person interaction is now virtual. And, Zoom and other platforms have filled that gap. And I think, frankly, similar to some of the stances that have been taken on a risk acceptance basis around, say, like patient data, just to get the job done to keep people as physically safe as possible, is lean to a default kind of expose, frankly, data. That 2,900% increase in use of Zoom, in some cases is also that, right? It's adopted on a risk acceptance basis, right? We need to get a job done, and we're going to do that. A lot of the investment in making collaboration secure, frankly, in a more network-oriented environment with assumptions that people are going to be interacting in their sort of enterprise context, has evaporated. Right, in a lot of cases, it's not just BYOD. It's bring your own office, bring your own everything, and so we've seen across our 6,500 customers, just within the organizations that have already said, we want to take the security position that and the offerings that Virtue has, a 3x increase, just expansion within our customer base, as well as an acceleration of companies, adopting. But the workflows are dramatic, just in terms of some of these adaptations. I mean, you have doctors who are trying to figure out how do I do interviews? How do I conduct interviews with patients? How do I do that in a HIPAA compliant way? How can we make sure that what would have been captured through an in-person process over whatever platform becomes part of that record over time, that has integrity, that is available, that's confidential, and most of these platforms don't yet have a strong solution there. And then even more dramatically, we have a lot of customers who are like title companies, right? Most of the process is now virtual, where it would have been in person. Like, really, you want to be doing a house purchase in person. How do you make sure that those assets that are being communicated, super sensitive information, right? You're going to be opening yourself from am I creditworthy? Am I, all these sorts of things, communicating these documents, like, can that still be secure, and can that be authentic? Can that be authenticated? So I definitely, a lot of people are being very creative. We've seen a lot of pickup. There's a lot of work still to be done. So.
Chris, did you?
Well, so and Will,
add on that?
Yeah. So I think Will brought up the point well, in that people are being forced into virtual, right? There is not an option, and unless you're willing to assume a level of risk, or your job just doesn't allow it, you're going to be virtual for a large period of time in the foreseeable future. So great, you're forced to virtual. That's why Zoom has the growth it has, and Zoom, and let's not just focus on Zoom. I'm sure Teams and all the others have exponentially grown as well. But really, the next challenge is, okay, the data, the content. So you're going to do your work, and how do you share that information? How do you share it securely? How do you pass that around and control that? So if I'm going to do that within any platform right now, any collaboration platform, even the one that we're using today, I'm going to share that in a chat. Well, that's available to everybody in the chat. Everybody's got it, then can share it and do whatever else they want with it. And so that's the problem, is that if we don't have those controls over the data, controls over the platforms, I mean, Zoom's not giving the keys to Zoom. Like, you're not going to get into the details of how that's operating. So what do you do about it? I think that's really, how do you control that and do it in a way that is going to allow you to remain virtual, but have the controls and visibility into what's going on with your information?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Just in terms of the nature of that problem, when Zoom was called out on some of the cryptography, right, when people were poking very lightly into what they are doing, they make a lot of claims, and a lot of security solutions will make claims about encryption, and they will talk as fast as they can and throw big words to try to get you convinced that, wow, they're very smart and I don't understand. That must be so sophisticated that my data is really secure. I think most of the time when you see people doing that, be very skeptical, because it's, the question is, like, what does that give you, right? What kind of confidence and control do you derive from a service provider, whether it's Google or Microsoft or Amazon or Zoom? What semblance of, what did you have to trust yesterday that you don't have to trust anymore tomorrow, right? Because they've implemented something. And data at rest comes up a lot, data in transit comes up a lot, but when push comes to shove, the preponderance of those solutions don't give you insight. They don't give you control. You still have to trust the service provider. Every copy of that data still becomes a leak potential, right? There are administrators of that system who you have to control, right? And at the control plane level, right? If someone has said, here's how we're operating, thinking about, okay, well, who do I trust? What can change underneath me? And when it comes to a platform like Zoom, it's, I think there's work to be done still. Frankly, in terms of like every live kind of collaboration provider, in a lot of cases, there isn't a good reason for that provider to have access to the data. If they don't, let's insist on end-to-end encryption, right? Let's not have to trust someone who you don't have to. And I think a lot of times, we're seeing this with a lot of our highly regulated customers, right? Where whether it's financial or it's government, it's, they're either not adopting these awesome user experiences, or they're accepting risk that frankly they shouldn't be, right? And a lot of times ends up biting them in the rear. And it's not necessarily the wrong answer given the technology that they're offering, but it's a risk acceptance that we fundamentally don't have to make if it's built right. We're in a position today, I would argue, to insist on that additional level of control and security, and frankly, that's what as Chris mentioned, like highly aligned on mission. And highly aligned from a complementary technology standpoint. That's what we're working on together.
Yeah, and to that point, we're going to say that as Zoom has come out, oh, we fixed our security problems, we fixed any of the security gaps. Sure, I believe that. As I believe in any organization is focused on doing their best to put in their best firewalls, configure them correctly, do that job. Great, take care of that security piece. We're not talking about a pure security problem. We're talking about a communication and a data privacy problem. And that's what no collaboration tool is talking about that, because that's, even Google has said years ago, privacy is not a problem with Chrome. We focus on security. It's your job to handle privacy. Every company pushes off privacy to the user and to the buyer. And that's just fundamentally wrong. That's why we have the problems we have today.
Yep. And so to kind of pull from that into, obviously what we're seeing now is this massive increase, but collaboration has been happening and has needed to happen in a secured environment for at least the last decade, right? Through a virtual kind of space and information sharing. And some of the issues, as you've brought up, go from, title and real estate to the doctors trying to have a video conference. They really do scan a lot of different industries. Obviously, we're seeing more of the kind of day-to-day industry interactions having to scramble to find how to protect that data that normally would be in the very secure online, in-person system. But to help me understand, obviously vaccines are all over the headlines and all over our minds, and how they're doing that research, and they're obviously having to be more transparent with this particular vaccine search than they have previously. But that still means there has to be some privacy around that process, right? And there's some IP and intellectual property. Navy SEALs, another great example. They're not wanting to share their operations until it's a success, and usually a couple of years later. And same with investments. I think we've hit on the financial sector a little bit. So, Chris, could you just walk me through what you're seeing as a connective tissue vis-a-vis these issues across these industries?
Sure. So, I mean, it fundamentally comes down to data sharing, right? So we started this out with talking about collaboration, but it's data sharing. So let's start out with vaccine research and COVID research. So right now, COVID research is focused on what is the best path forward. Obviously, in the news, everybody hears about vaccines, right? But how do we get to that point of a vaccine or even a vaccine trial? Well, you have to choose the pathways within the biological pathways that might be best suited to have an antiviral treatment or a vaccine pathway for a treatment. So how do you choose that path? Well, right now, a lot of our pharmaceutical companies and medical researchers are relying on AI to help them sift through the mountains of clinical trials and previous virus and bacterial research and to determine what is the viable path forward. Because the humans, we've got so much data and humans really can't mine through that anymore. And so that's great. And that really helped speed up our current process with COVID-19. But the problem is that is relying on data that they have to have some level of trust with. So some of the vaccine trials trusted on Stanford research. Some of the vaccine trials relied on other NIH data. And they had to get that data at some point. They had to trust that it came from Stanford. They had to trust that it's not been manipulated. They had to trust that trial itself wasn't influenced at all. And how do you build that level of trust in with content in the current environment? And you just can't. And so there it is, the person-to-person relationship. I trust Will, I trust Jamie, I trust whomever. Okay, I believe they're going to do encryption and send it over to me correctly. You can put the security things in place to protect the transport, but to understand where that data came from to begin with, to understand the algorithms that they used to choose the pathways after that. What did they use for the training data to get to those algorithms? Where did the data come from? That provenance usually is not possible right now. That's what we've got to overcome. All right, so that is vaccine research in a bucket, right? And vaccine, not even 101. So that's vaccine research. Now let's move on to Navy SEALs are a great example, but any military organization has to share data, and the United States is not in a bubble, and we're doing military work. You're coordinating with other countries, other nations, and you have to share information. And sometimes that information you can't trust to everybody. You have to give it to a subset. And even then, sometimes you want the ability to pull back that data when somebody shouldn't have it anymore. Even within the government, we want to protect data, as Jamie, you mentioned around operations, sure. But information sharing has to have the trust level built into it. And so who should have access to data at what time has always been a challenge for the federal government. And when you throw in international data sharing into that and treaty agreements, legal data sharing, now that's where the overlaps start to come in. So as Will mentioned earlier, HIPAA in medical, and then you go into all the international treaties that we have all around data sharing, all the federal policies that we have around freedom of information. All that has to be taken into account when you figure out who can have access to what. Again, if you're not having a system that can handle all of this, or a process or way to handle all of this, it's impossible. So you fall into the trap that Will mentioned explicitly of you're accepting risk because you have no other option. And we don't need to do that. So the investment manager example, the third one comes in, it's a little bit different because, okay, great, investment managers, sure, they're making money for people. Well, protect those guys, sure, but let's protect the vaccines and the government first, right? Well, actually, if you think about it, threat to financial institutions obviously have a huge impact on the U.S. and on individuals and citizens, but also for that infrastructure, that financial institutions to be protected, they have to share information among financial institutions, and especially around cyber. And so investment managers, this was a project that Virtru and Gray Market Labs were working on together, was how do you allow investment management groups to share cyber breach information amongst themselves? Again, this breach information is incredibly sensitive, not just for the vulnerabilities it potentially showed for those organizations, but also for who was impacted by it. There might have been customers impacted by those breaches. They have to be able to share that information in a protected and trusted way with their colleagues at other organizations, so these things don't happen again. That capability has not existed to date, right? And that's what we've really focused on is how do you now allow this data sharing with potential competitors, but you have to do it, and you have to do it in the most trusted and safe way you can. And our approaches to do that, I think, were what has fundamentally changed what organizations, and whether they're government or commercial, are able to do from a data sharing, data collaboration way potential. That, again, us talking across WebEx or talking across these collaboration systems right now, they just don't enable that.
I think a lot of times what these organizations end up doing is creating a lot of painful one-off environments, right? With a lot of contracts to try to fill in the gaps where you don't have technical trust and you need this contractual trust, and threat of penalties, and whether it's to conduct an operation, setting up an entirely new, like in the military space, like an entirely new coalition network, like running new wires, new computers, new identity. And it's a painful process, right? And what we end up doing to execute what is mission necessary doesn't scale, right? You can't take that network once it's built and say, all right, let's flip the switch. We have a new area of responsibility. We have a new set of people we want to collaborate with. And some of that data we can use, but some of it we can't, but that's okay, right? The way we're set up today, it's not okay. Like, we're going to be running new wires. We had some very direct experience with a pharmaceutical company, two organizations very motivated to combine their data, right? One pharma, one of the top molecular data that, frankly, some drug candidates were rejected because didn't quite meet the threshold of effectiveness. If you take genomic data and you discriminate, like literally say, look, here's a cohort where it's super effective. And yet we now know that if you have this genotype, it's going to be toxic. And we're going to remove you. But guess what? Now this actually looks extraordinarily powerful. Like, we can take existing data and existing clinical research and find extraordinarily powerful drug candidates. And it still took them 9 months to set up the environment because neither of them wanted to give up control of their crown jewels.
Yeah.
Right. So if we can come up with, that scalable approach, and we can invest in those mechanisms, the data-driven economy, I think, can be dramatically accelerated.
Yeah, even as fast as it's going, right? I mean, we can imagine those, you said 9 months to get the environment set up. I mean, what if we can have an environment up in 2 hours?
That's right.
Now, to get an environment set up is one thing. Now, getting the data over. If we still had to do the data, I would submit the longest part of that 9 months is probably the data and having what are the controls around that data. But if the controls lived with the data, now, okay, great. Well, I set up the environment in 2 hours. Maybe it took me another couple hours to send over that data. If it was super massive, maybe it took me a couple of days. But again, within a week, you've got this environment where previously it would have taken you 9 months. I think that's the promise we're looking to achieve.
Exactly right. Yep. And in this particular case, it's like one of the core concerns for us in terms of individuals in control of our data. Right? This is a privacy issue and a security issue. Is consent. Right. When I spit into the thing and mail it out, what am I explicitly consenting to? What am I implicitly consenting to now and in the future? And how do I know that that's going to be governed? Like that particular collaboration, their consent management systems were a mess. And internally, cringe, cross fingers, hope that everything is okay. But taking those kinds of controls, like you said, Chris, and building it into the fabric is both better privacy, security, and mission outcome. Right.
Yeah. So these. Go ahead, Jamie. Sorry.
I was just going to say, kind of building off of that reliability of the data. There's obviously we're a cat and mouse game, right? So technology keeps evolving to make data look reliable, right? Or it's playing with our minds of what is real and what is trustworthy. So, Chris, could you kind of talk through where you are seeing technology racing ahead and where we need to think about that trust and security?
Sure. Yeah. No, this was, and in these examples, we had focused a little bit on AI, right? And so, and the promise of AI, but what is really going on with the data? And I mentioned earlier when we were talking about vaccine research, every AI algorithm has to be trained off of a good set of data, and to be able to do any sort of correlation. And it's always been this way. While AI is hitting the news, any of us that have worked in the field for a while have always known that good, reliable, gold set of data is in itself worth its weight in gold, because it's very hard to put together. It's very hard to have that initial training set of clean data to work off of. So that's where generally a lot of the problems come in, of getting that initial data set. These examples here, once you are working with data, are the challenges that are happening out there. And I'm actually going to start in the middle here because it ties, I think, mostly to what we were talking about already, and the explosion of synthetic data. So talking about health information, there are companies out there, and there's some startups and some more mature companies that are creating artificial or synthetic health data for the purposes of protecting personally identifiable information or public or personal health information. And so when you're talking about HIPAA, you're talking about protections. That's the core of it, is how do you protect patient data? And so there's companies there creating synthetic data to eliminate the concern around that. Well, I don't have to worry about HIPAA because I'm not using real data. And that gets them away from the thousands of dollars per piece of data per incident that gets you quickly into fines in the millions of dollars, ruins most companies. So people don't do it. So, but the problem with the synthetic data is how do you know how that was created to begin with? What was the source of it? How do you know if there was an error that baked into it that you didn't see until line 10,135? And there was maybe a decision made based on that data that, again, likely is not going to drive to an immediate human death or impact, but is going to put you on the path. If you're talking about vaccine research, it could put you down the wrong path of which way to go to do an effective vaccine or an effective antiviral. To Will's part, what if they put somebody in the wrong cohort, right? Of, no, this treatment is really good for you. You should be in cohort A. This treatment is really toxic for you. You're excluded in cohort B. If that decision gets messed up somehow because of the use of synthetic data, you've got a really big problem. And so it gets back to, where did the data come from to begin with? And having the provenance of that that travels with the data is critically important. And I think from this slide, that's the one I really want to just focus and leave it on that. And we'll just see if you've got anything you want to share or comment on that.
Before getting into kind of the solution space, I think I'm very data oriented. So, but 3 categories, right? It's the training data, the algorithm that is being used to consume that training data to produce a model, and the model itself, right? And I think if you are using a model, it should be an expectation that that model you can know, right, by some mechanism that is reliable, where that model came from an algorithm standpoint and from a training set standpoint, characteristically. And that there is a reason to believe that all of those things should be trusted today. And a lot of the collaboration, anxiety, and friction, like cross healthcare organization, if you're talking about like health, but also across a lot of other organizations, particularly in the AI space, is a lack of sort of understanding of how we're going to achieve that.
Jamie, you're muted.
In the office, and there's side noise. So this, we've been talking, and this sort of brings it to a head of, talking about the data sourcing, talking about how we verify that data, and then this kind of false perception of anonymity, right? And how that we think that may or may not help us engage in the world and protect ourselves. So, I really want to get to talking about the solution space, but where are you seeing, this sort of problem manifesting itself, or how are we misaligning maybe what we think is privacy and protection versus how we can be equipped to do our jobs better?
So I'll jump in on the anonymity piece because I don't think we've hit on that very much. That's right now it's kind of working on the internet and the concept of anonymity. And that's what people generally have had for a long time. Is if I'm online, I'm fairly anonymous. In the past few years, if I use incognito mode for my browser, I'm going to be anonymous. Okay, if I use anonymous browsers, I'm going to be anonymous. I mean, this concept has continued to grow and evolve, and this desire to be anonymous online, and we've seen it lead to really bad behavior, and a lot of the times that bad behavior has been directly attributable back to a human and to a person, because the veil of anonymity is just really false, right? And it's if you are trying to be anonymous online, I mean, there's lots of things people can do to try to break the trail and try to not have them self-tracked, but there's always a gap. There's always a seam in what someone is trying to do, and that's where the exposure happens. And right now, even if you try to appear to be anonymous online, you're trying to get access to information, certain websites are blocking you. If you appear to be coming from an anonymous browser or anonymous application of some sort, you're going to get blocked. In 2 to 3 years, if you don't have a verifiable identity and you're anonymous, you're not going to have access to any information online. So forget collaboration. You're not going to be able to use a Zoom or use any of these environments if you're going to be purporting to be of this blank slate that just exists, because that I think moving beyond the risk acceptance of certain organizations, we're moving beyond our allowance or our ability to have digital identities that aren't more trusted. Where we have to have that trust in the individual or the organization at the other end of the wire. How you do that is really complex, and there's a lot behind that. But building that trust into the communications and collaborations online, anonymity just does not fit in that world.
The use cases we talked before briefly, again, maybe as a prelude to some of the opportunities to address this. And anonymity is a adopted at scale approach for solving for collaboration among organizations, right? Anonymizing patient record data as a prerequisite to data science workflows, right? And the problem is, as defined by HIPAA, it is grossly insufficient, right? So it's actually creating both types of errors. One is on on the reducing the fidelity of the data and the usability of the data, the way that people are having to aggressively remove context because of re-identifiability when they're trying to do that job well, but then the error on the actual re-identifiability, very much like our activity patterns online. Our genomic data is fundamentally a fingerprint. You cannot, while HIPAA says you can remove a name and now it's anonymous, research has proven that the preponderance of genomic data without a name could be very rapidly re-identified, right? You know exactly whether a certain thing would be a sibling, parent, or child of someone. And if you already know enough of that graph and the heritage, you're going to be able to figure that out. So, a different approach fundamentally is necessary because we are failing on both ends. We're failing to be effective on the deriving value from data, and we're leaking it.
Yeah, and it's the same situation we deal with security, right? Security is all about think of your organization as Swiss cheese. Security is filling the holes in the Swiss cheese, right? And there's always more holes. You never find all the holes. And it's the same thing if you're trying to take this data and you're trying to clean it out and cleanse it. You're removing the value at some point, right? So, okay, remove all the personally identifiable information. Well, then you're left with a data set that has very little value in doing any analytics on top of. So, okay, well, let's do like you try to slide the scale until you try to find that sweet spot. There is no sweet spot. You're always going to have a compromise that's going to have something that collapse behind it. So what we've been talking about, and I think Jamie's is starting to bring up here in this next slide, is what are the new approaches we can take so we can stop making this compromise. It's not a zero-sum game here. We can make some of these things better and in taking some new and different approaches to it. So Jamie, do we have you back? All right, maybe not yet. So on the new approach slide here, and new opportunities. So Will, I'll punt it to you to start off here.
I'm back.
Oh, there she is. We hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that, but I just got kicked off the internet. So I think what we were doing is wrapping up and moving into the actual how you're solving this, right? So, so Will, I'd love to hear your approach.
Yeah, I think the very complementary to the ethos and in terms of what Green Market Labs is doing from all these dimensions, and then taking that directly to the data, right? As we were talking about, if we have valuable information that might have privacy implications, that might have simultaneously privacy, security, and trust implications. Like, how can we, with a unified approach in a way that allows us to collaborate with other organizations, make that possible? And frankly, as I was alluding to earlier in the Zoom context, with all this encryption that's happening, does that give you control? No, but it could, right? With less effort, right? And then aligned. From a control standpoint, if you put the rightful data owner in control of keys for data, that can manifest as privacy, right? An individual with their PII, wherever it might go, can use encryption as a means of governing what's private and under what conditions. So, and conversely, from an IP or otherwise standpoint, being able to make sure that adversaries who might have unauthorized access to it, if you've got effectively self-protecting data through encryption, then that can be secure. Now, encryption isn't new. But really the real trick is the usability, and having an open set of standards. And when we looked at this issue in 2012, 2011, there was no open format, no data standard for saying, hey, I'm going to encrypt this and I want to continue to control the key, right? To say, yes, you can see this, or no, you can't. And so, foundationally, what we've done in working with Gray Market Labs, to bring it into collaboration environments is exactly that. The power and the ability to say, before I share, I'm going to associate a policy with this data, maybe through data attributes. People who are coming from the government environment are going to, a lot of these things are going to sound very familiar, right, in terms of data classification and need to know. But you can do it in a way which is really intuitive for folks like a patient, right? To say, here's my genomic data, and I authorize it for research purposes or not, and then it's our job to make sure that that is, feathered through the infrastructure. And then from a trust standpoint, a lot of that, not just from a confidentiality, but now that I see this data, let's say that my patient record is being shared with an organization and we're going to be using that for training. Does that have some kind of a tamper evident treatment, right? If someone tries to manipulate that data, the signature breaks, right? And we now know that it's probably a deep fake, or it's synthetic, or it's a advanced adversary trying to subtly manipulate in a way where they might understand what the algorithm is and get it to fail in ways that are catastrophic. But yeah, I think, foundationally for us, I think having open standards for being able to build that security into data can be a really powerful way of addressing foundationally sort of a cornerstone for building each of these.
Yeah, and so Will, on that, you mentioned a really interesting point of the checks, the check on a piece of data or something like that, right? And to kind of counteract deepfakes. There's a technology my co-founder is enamored with, is Blu-ray, right? So there's a signal that runs through Blu-ray that if you copy Blu-ray will prevent that disc from being played. And the technology is very simple. It's not complex at all, but it defeats any sort of copying mechanism or compression or anything that you would run this data through. It persists. So you've got this constant signal that can not only prevent the copying of it, but can prevent the manipulation of that video. Having that as an open standard for all data, I think, is what we're looking for. And so, therefore, great. So then you get to some real provenance stuff. Where did this come from? Okay, well, that is the signature coming from the National Institutes of Health. Okay, I got a fairly high trust in that piece of information. Oh, this information has been put out from Bank of America. Okay, I trust that institution. This is saying it's coming from the Bank of New York, but the signature broke. So I don't really think I don't need to go reset my account. I mean, you can see the use cases that come out of that, and in a lot of different ways. So that's on the content side, right? And so how do we kind of pull that through and have trust move with the content and have it verifiable? I think that's fantastic. On how we're operating with this and how we actually get this in the hands of the most number of people, the most number of organizations, well, there's got to be a common way to do that. So it's a common approach, common structure. So we talk about how we create these environments for people to collaborate within. And so right now, I can create an environment, and we could stand up an environment that would have this level of trust baked into it. And if I wanted to do it as a one-off for my organization, I could go do that. If smart technical people can go create these environments that have trust built in, that has the security in place, and could ride a trusted data format, TDF encrypted documents along with it. But then when you have to scale those, you have to create 2 of these environments or 3 of them or 4 of them. Well, now it's not just the 3 of us having to talk. It's the 3 of us, plus we have to include 5 other organizations in the discussion. Having that scale and to bring in, okay, well, it's not just video collaboration. Now I need to bring in, can you bring in my Jupyter notebook so I can do my data analysis on that? Well, okay. Well, now I need another piece that comes in here. Bringing all that technology together in one place and in thousands of different configurations on demand, that's really, really difficult. So that's what we kind of have to be able to put in place. That's where what we do kind of comes into play, and where we partner with Virtru. Again, providing the protections on the content, Gray Market Labs providing those protections on the actual activity, the operations of a given organization. That's what we do. So, I need a data science environment, and I need that data science environment that has that level of trust built in. That's what we bring to bear. That's where kind of our patents, our intellectual properties been around. So I spent a lot of my brain power on over the past few years. And so bringing those 2 things together, now you've got these environments that you can then scale. As we said, this isn't going to take you 9 months to stand up. This takes you 2 hours to stand up a brand new platform. Maybe it's going to take you a few days to get all your content and data in there and the right configurations. But once you're there, we'll scale it to 1,000 users, scale it to 10,000 users, to 1 million users. That part is trivial. That's really where we've finally been able to get to with the technology, is changing the game. And Will, I wanted to ask you one question, and because this has always kind of enamored me when I think about the content and what our analytics could do on the data that you're protecting. Tell us a little bit about doing analytics on encrypted data, right? So can we get some knowledge out of encrypted data without actually exposing that underlying raw data itself?
Appreciate that. I definitely want to leave time for questions from everyone else. Definitely feed them fast and furious. But in the meantime, actually, we've one of the things conversely enamored about your platform is the ability to say, look, I've got a legacy application, or what might be considered legacy. I don't need to pop the hood, add code. I can just put it in one of your containers, and then and you can log in and you'll see the data that you're privileged to see, right? So you could attach to, right? You can become that mechanism by which you can reach into a data lake with your existing app and see data, and then the TDF and the permissioning can turn on and off access, right? So lots of different collaborators can see exactly what they're permissioned to see in a sort of shared environment. In 2 approaches in terms of being able data in use, right? So the classic transit, data in transit, data at rest, and the data in use piece. Having a mechanism to be able to say, okay, I know that the code that's going to be operating on this data is of highest assurance. I know the environment that it's operating in gives you can have a cryptographic source of truth and a direct attestation, knowing that you do not even have to trust the administrator of the system that's actually running analysis of your code. With hardware a root of trust made super simple. And if you want to go one step further, I think maybe what you're alluding to is being able to run training algorithms on data that's been kind of cryptographically hashed in a highly granular, privacy preserving way, being able to infer patterns across the data set without having anything individually identifiable, and having that provable using mathematical techniques that are really well established, like differential privacy, the signal and the noise, right? And that can be extraordinarily powerful when the trust levels are particularly or would be problematic otherwise.
So I would like to open this up. I mean, you guys have hit on so many great things, but I want to let the attendees lodge some questions at you. And I've gotten a couple through a different platform, kind of connected in, but folks, if you see the chat function, feel free to throw your questions in there as well. and we can tackle them as they come in. But one right off the bat, Will, since you just finished speaking, I think this one was maybe directed towards you. You've talked a lot about genomics in the medical field. What do you see as far as syncing the various medical records across patient medical records across multiple systems and providers? How does your solution fit with that, or how do you see that working?
Yeah, it's a great question. Frankly, and depending on where you sit, this may be a controversial, but I think it is an underlying reality, which is that a whole lot of rent is charged all of us by the electronic health record vendors, because of a lot of which is anchoring on the power that they have through the control of our data, and then the claims that they can make around the necessity of having that in a siloed system because of privacy, because of HIPAA. And we're proving that the ability, like that approach, is going to be costlier and less reliable, and will result in much poor outcomes than if you put that data directly in control of the patient. That patient can immediately delegate control to other parties, like a provider. It doesn't have to be a burden for the patient. But undoing this assumption around kind of this custodian who knows better than we do. And I won't name names, but there are a couple of behemoths, right, that charge inordinate amounts of money for these very basic collaboration features. Oh, I'm going to provide a connector so that someone else can consume that data. I'm going to charge you an arm and a leg. Having an open standard where the data is self-protecting means that can be an immediate, zero friction proposition, right? If the data is self-protecting and you have to ask for the key in order to consume it, there is no risk acceptance process, right? The data has been already been protected. It's really just that authorization. How do you want to use that data? How is that going to be used downstream? And really allowing that data to land where it needs to be. And frankly, people have died, and there is a large provider in the Northeast that knows exactly how many people died because they were given a drug that they were allergic to, and the patient record migration only included 2 years of back history because of costs associated with exactly this legacy approach. So frankly, I think it is about saving lives when push comes to shove.
That's awesome. So Chris, this next question, I think gets pivoted to you, and it's also about saving lives. It's about saving people like me who have to work from home now, way more than I ever thought I would. So it's this new, what post-COVID workplace is going to look like. And obviously I'm working with a government agency, and we're trying to figure out how to stay within the security, parameters, but also get work done. And I think we launched with that, so it might be kind of good to wrap it, as we wrap up the session, into that of, we've got to get stuff done. We've got to be proactive, but we also need to be mindful of protecting ourselves and our employers and the data that we're kind of passing through. What do you see this new world looking like?
Yeah, so it's we're here in the new world. So it's what are we going to see in the near future, and what needs to come through to allow us to get value back out of this, right? So we've always found the tremendous value in interpersonal interactions, right? And that a big part of that has been taken away. So how do we make this experience better and more enjoyable and fruitful to be working online together? I think, Jamie, I don't know if it's you or somebody else I've talked to recently brought up the point that the friction that we deal with in collaboration environments is costing us billions of dollars a year, right? So now with the $35 billion in wasted time and effort, whether it is teleconferences and, hey, are you muted? Hey, are you online? Or to actual Zoom sessions and the lack of ability to share and collaborate on information effectively and have all these protections in place that we need to have, but still having the value out of it. So I think that's where we're going to really change, is unlocking the value out of what the internet and what this collaboration environments can provide. But how do we get there is what we need to change. And so we need to have, we have to stop forcing organizations to have these fleets of laptops and these fleets of devices. And, oh, do I care that you're on an iPhone versus a laptop? We need to have common environments. So it goes back to an open approach and open architectures on how to do this. So creating environments that can be done at scale, that are cost effective, that everybody can work within, and that are fast. So you're going to have environments that are going to be set up to say, okay, well, I'm Chris Schroeder. I'm working as running Gray Market Labs. I've got environments set up that are configured for me to do that work. But I'm also an avid runner, and I'm interested in races and things going on, and what's the latest gear and stuff. And I'm doing my research over that. Those two lives and those two worlds are different. You need to be able to separate those when you're collaborating. And the only way to do that is within different profiles, different ways of separating these environments. But if I'm on my laptop, that's all together. My Chrome profile has targeted me as both of those people all meshed together as one. And that can't happen. You've got to have a way to have separate environments, but do it cost effectively and scalably, where, okay, if I have an error environment, I can destroy it and rebuild it. I can start to get different data accesses depending on which environment I'm working with. So I can link in with data that you would collaborate with from DIU for defense purposes. You don't want that to ever be a chance of overlapping with your personal world. So why should we be using forcing this laptop, this device, to force those restrictions in place? We can set that up in these cloud-based or other virtualized environments to make that happen. That's what I see as the change. It's just a fundamental different approach to how we do this that I think can be incredibly cost-effective, can actually save money in the short term for most organizations at scale. And so I think that's what we're going to see here in the near term.
We have another question that came in. I don't know if Will saw that one too, from Levente. It's a very good question. It's meaty, and we don't have much time, but I'm going to go through it, and let's have you guys decide who wants to tackle it. He's asking, what approach would you, Will or Chris, favor or see practical, feasible in terms of setting privacy options when creating content? One option would be let the user decide what type of current and future sharing settings they choose, with the default being to no sharing, so default to complete lockdown. Number two would be utilize some sort of AI-based function for fine-tuning the option set. I think their concern is that people are always going to pick the path of least resistance, which is let me get through this as fast as I can. Yes, 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 no, or no, 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 next.
Yeah. So, Will, I'll let you drive this one. I've got a couple seconds I want to tap down.
Yeah, best question I've had all week. Frankly, we've been doing some really incredible user experience and policy research with one of the larger healthcare institutions in the New York area for this purpose exactly. In our policy has been to start that basically you have it's actually really quite a hybrid. You empower providers that you trust through normal interactions. So how close can you get to normal interactions, questions that you're used to, not like, oh, analytic XYZ, do you want to approve this? I have no idea, right? But I trust providers but then trust and verify, right? To take that phrase, but right. So with TDF, what you can do is say, look, here are the organizations I trust, and then over an audit period, how is that data being used, right? And then categorically, if I have said yes to a very broad question like I authorize research, is that sort of attested to be under that category? Right? right? You can just get some context and you can dig if you want to. And then I think over time, very much like the financial industry has leveraged AI in an incredibly powerful way, fine tune that so that that can become a constraint on that resharing and use, right? So as that sharing graph can occur, perhaps if you can develop heuristics over time, like this is a high risk thing. Someone that we're not used to is all of a sudden asking for a lot of data. We're going to do a challenge. We're going to turn that off potentially and ask you to say yes. So it's a really good question. I think as we start giving data owners more control, refining and developing those really intuitive yet powerful policy engagement mechanisms, I think is going to be one of the kind of the next horizon in terms of research and development.
Yeah, and that doing that in a way where you can create, again, you're going to be dealing with this data sharing in multiple roles, right? So you'll have your job today that you're dealing with, and whether that's a military role or that's a medical or a financial services role, that your work, you're probably going to have many different projects you're working on. You'll have many different policies you're going to have to enforce for those different projects. So having the ability to have environments link up to different policy servers and have different trusts as your default environment, but have it really transparent and really easy for the user, that's what we're all about, right? So all this, like what Will just went through, sounds incredibly complex, and it absolutely is. If you have to go implement that, doing that policy and linking that policy up with data is incredibly hard unless you have a way to easily and easy for most users to implement. That's what we've done. That's what you have to put in place, are those type of rapidly created environments to inherently have those policies, the connections to those policy servers.
So, yeah.
That's a good point.
Well, I think we have exhausted our time, even though I would love to keep going and digging into more of these particulars. But so Chris, thank you. Will, thank you so much for joining the conversation today. Obviously, the attendees, please reach out to Gray Market Labs and Virtue and learn more about their solutions. And then also, please take advantage of DC Cyber Week wherever you are in the globe. You can enjoy it from your living room, maybe this year only, who knows. So keep the learning up and keep being engaged with all the things that are being offered. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate the time. Bye, everyone.